My first sex education. I think the first thing that comes to mind, other than like learning from friends, would be like in the 5th grade when they had like the boys and the girls separated and you had to watch your separate movies. Or actually, I don't know if it was a movie, but like a little slideshow about like your body and the things that were going to be happening. And I think that was really the extent of it. Like I didn't hear anything from my parents that I really remember until whenever I got like my period. Then I heard from them, but honestly not a whole lot really was said. It was just kind of like, oh, this thing is happening to you now. Good luck. Fifth grade range, like I had no concept of anything other than like boy and girl together. Like I think if you had said anything else to me at that age, I probably would have been like, pew. So I think that would have been like really cool, and I think that would have done like groundbreaking work in my head at a much younger age, which probably would have been easier to process when I was then, you know, older and realizing things about myself. So yeah, I definitely think that would have been important.
When I was in preschool, the first time I ever received any sort of sexual education, I came home and I went to my grandmother and I went, "Hey, I heard something about rubbing belly buttons together and that being sex. Is that for real?" And she was like, "You need to talk with your mother right now," especially as someone coming from a very religious background. When I was younger, it was a bit of a stressor.
I think the first one is 5th grade, when they would like take all the girls in one room and all the boys in another room, and it was like mad awkward, and they played like one of those like really bad like videos, and then they gave us a little bag with one pad in it and like a little like info card and that was it. And then the dudes got like the completely different thing where they were just like, "Please wear deodorant," and we got like the whole like actual like, "Oh, you're about to enter the worst thing ever, good luck."
I think one of my first memories of sexual education was finding it out on my own, because I got my first menstrual cycle in 3rd or 4th grade. So at that point, sexual education had not been like applied to school in any way. It started around 5th or 6th grade for me. So a lot of it was trial and error. And honestly, when I got my first period, I thought I was dying, and I kept it a secret for like 3 months.
I do believe I see myself represented in some ways by the reproductive justice movement based on appearance, which there is some weight to that. As someone who is read by most as a cis white woman, there's an element of it that I don't quite know how to identify in being someone who is transmasc, but I do think there is an unspoken element there, or an unidentified element there, of just maybe like disconnectedness from that, and that could just be like some amount of disconnectedness from femininity, and usually that's what you see represented. It's a very complex question, even like in me, when trying to respond is really hard, because it's like I am both living my truth and not, even though I'm fully just existing.
I don't think I often see myself represented, no. At least when I think of it, like typically I don't see trans men talked about or represented in any sort of reproductive rights or health ways. Like the only exception I can think of is like when it's made by queer folks, like in this instance.
As a trans male, respectively, have the same intersexual organs as a cis woman, and I think that although that they're so drastically different, like trans issues and women's rights issues go hand in hand, and like they can become very like integrated. So like it's important to have also people like me in those conversations, not overrule them, but that we're also a part of it too, and that we're just as much of like want to fight for that right for you as like much as we want you to fight for that right for me. So
I was like, oh, it's not my place, it's not my business, like that's a woman's thing, and it like gave me like dysphoria to a certain extent. So it was more of just like protecting myself. Now that I've transitioned, I guess, I can look at the reproductive justice movement and be like, oh no, this does relate to me.
I can't speak for other trans people or other people who are able to give birth, but I feel that there is like a lack of conversation around anyone who's not like a cis woman giving birth. So I feel like a lot of times non-binary people and like trans men or any other type of person who can give birth, they're overlooked in the conversation. It's very easy for anyone who's just like capable of having a child to just have a child, but to adopt or like do surrogacy is like a very painful and extensive process. In terms of like my reproductive health journey, initially like getting the proper care was rather difficult, and I didn't really know about any specialty care until like coming out as trans to my therapist and like asking for resources. And that's when I was like sent to an endocrinologist who works for like, they specialize in PrEP and queer people's healthcare. So that opened up that opened up the door for me to like have access to more contraceptives. Of course, I can take agency and like do it myself, but it would have been helpful going to someone who's supposed to provide me healthcare, giving me at least a name of someone who I can go to access this healthcare. So that was something that was frustrating.
When I was in high school, my like periods were all weird. So they were like, oh, take birth control. And I was like, I'm 14. Like, okay. And it just like actually made everything worse. Because like my little baby hormones weren't ready for like adult hormones yet. I have yet to ever go to the gynecologist. I'm too scared. It's so invasive, and they do nothing at the gynecologist to make it like less scary. It's so apparent that it's like a women's field because like there's been no developments in gynecology in like any time recently. Like they're still using like the scariest looking medical equipment, where in every other field they're like everything looks like new and sleek and modern, and like they're doing everything they can to like make it like okay. It's like impossible to get an appointment with a woman gynecologist because they're booked so far out because they're the only ones that people want to see. But like also I can't even blame them because I only want to see a woman gynecologist too.
And coming from the perspective as a trans man, from like general doctor's visits, it can be so much as I have told multiple people multiple time about my chosen name and pronouns, and I still get dead named just about every time. When I go pick up my testosterone prescription, I get dead named every time. I have been asked multiple times, do you want to switch your name, your pronouns, you can do that? Yes, of course, I would love to do that, please. Yeah, of course I'll do that for you. Still every time, it doesn't matter. I have had so many experiences with doctors not even it's always a question, or like I ask a question of a potential problem that I can have, and it's always just, I don't know. If a medical professional, despite me constantly bringing up the fact that I am trans and that I take this hormone, if they were more educated on that topic and what that can do to a person and like the effects it might have, or like how it can link into other things, they could have given me an answer straight away, and I would have had 6 less months of pain and money and driving everywhere to try and fix a problem that I shouldn't have had in the first place. Specifically for like my hormones themselves, I go to Planned Parenthood and they've been nothing but fantastic. Were great from the start. Yep, every time like I've ever had an interaction with them, like they're always just making sure that my well-being is safe, that everything with it's going fine, that I have supportive outlets. Like they're always actually interested in me as a person, like, you know, what I'm doing for school, what I want to do with my life, like my career, like do I need extra help or mental health services, like very, very on it. So it's been very good. And honestly, my experience also as a trans male with like gynecologists also been fine. I've always had a lot also better experience with women.
On testosterone for 5 years. I started with a gynecologist, except just at the time, like that was just the way the process went. You had to go through a gynecologist, at least in my area. I no longer have one. I just go through Planned Parenthood. They rock. I haven't had a lot of reproductive health like instances at like the doctors, but the one that I can think of that's like super difficult was I did have to have a pap smear. I did have to go through that, and that was like a super not trans friendly experience, just generally, I mean obviously, but also just I think the nature of it in terms of the language used, and just, yeah, it's just a really strange and not gender confirming experience to have to go through, but nonetheless you have to go through it because sexual health is very important.
I have this thing where my period goes away for like months at a time. Then during the summer it went away for like almost like 4 months. And I was like, I could be in my second trimester. Like, I need to go check that out. Like, something could be wrong. And so I get in there, and they're like, okay, we're gonna shove this wand up you. Because, like, I didn't know what that was. And it turns out the, like, technician doing my ultrasound didn't know why I was there. Like, couldn't give me any answers. I remember leaving, and they handed me, like, a chart of, like, my BMI. Like, something like, oh, maybe it's, like, your weight, or, like, based on your body. Like, this could be what's impacting it. And I just, like, felt, like, horrible leaving. They didn't diagnose me with anything after all of that. They were just kind of like, you should get on birth control to start regulating your period. So they were like, we'll call you in like 2 weeks to see if your period comes back, because I still didn't have it at that point. And it never came back, and they never called me, and I never got on birth control, and now I'm here. And my period keeps going away. I'm scared to reach out because I'll be like, okay, I'm undiagnosable. I don't have anything significant to be looked into, so I'm not going to go ask again because then I have to pay for it, you know? And then I don't want someone to be like not knowing what they're doing while shoving things in my body.
My mom and I had this huge blowout fight, and she was like, if you're gonna have sex, you gotta get on the pill. And I was like, okay, how do I do that? And then she scheduled the appointment. I went, and there were these like women's health, birth, etc. posters on the wall, and me, like a little trans boy, I was like, oh, I'm gonna throw up. Wow, I hate this. Because it caused like a great deal of dysphoria for me.
I don't really remember my experience with birth control a lot. That wasn't like a super influential part of my experience in this. I feel like me taking birth control at such a young age was definitely something that was more pushed onto me, which I know is like a pretty common experience, whether that be from the medical system or from parents. And I feel like for me, it was more so parents. As someone who identifies as transmasc, I was like, I don't necessarily want to do that. It might bring changes to my body that would make me even more dysphoric. It's definitely harder when you're like, no, I don't want to do this. I know this seems like the easy solution for everyone, but that's not anything for me.
I was put on the pill at 11 years old, which is incredibly young, but I had a lot of reproductive issues. My mom and my grandma are both people who had cervical cancer, and so I was kept on watch very young. But I never got to go to the gynecologist till I was around 14. So I spent 3 years on a pill that was incredibly high estrogen, which can be actually very damaging to your reproductive system, and I had no idea. So when I first got my first big girl exam, they were like, oh, what pill are you on? And I told them, and they were like, who did that to you? I went through that experience, and because of that, ever since, I've gone through birth control and birth control. I've tried everything. And even the one I'm on now, I have so many problems with it, but it's the one that doesn't suck the most. And that's really what it's a matter of, is like, what doesn't suck, you know, because they all do. I mean, other than that, I've had an amazing experience with my gynecologist. She's been so supportive because she worked on my mom and grandma, who both had cervical cancer, and she understands why I need to be in there more often than other people, because, you know, those things just spring up on you, and it's hereditary. I feel like I've believed a couple of myths because I did become sexually active pretty young in my life. I think the biggest one for me, and I feel like one that a lot of people have experienced, is that sex is just what porn is, especially the way porn portrays like queer sex. Another thing for me is the myth of virginity, because I did lose my quote-unquote virginity so young that when like people heard about it, or my parents or people at school, it was like hot tea. Like, people wanted to know about it because It's just like you're a different person now, but really like nothing changes, you know? It doesn't make you impure, especially growing up around like with Christian parents. That was a huge part of it. It was that now you're impure and no one's gonna want to marry you, which is obviously not true.
I also definitely thought that was like only penis and vagina was going to be the way that virginity, I guess, was classified as being taken. But like, I don't know, personally, I didn't have that experience, but I'm definitely not a virgin. So I think that was something that I kind of had to unlearn. Like, I still don't even know what I would classify that as. Most like cis men and women probably aren't thinking of these gray areas.
I don't think I knew any myths or anything about it. I was just kind of like, it's bad and I shouldn't do it. Or like, you should only do it if you like have a connection with them. Or definitely like wait till marriage, like all that stuff. I don't know if that's like a myth, but it's just like what I was told.
I mean, my like sexual education was like very lacking for the most part. Like, we never had like a follow-up in school after the puberty thing. Like, that was just where it ended. And then I had sex ed sophomore year of high school, where most people that I knew had already been going at it for years. So like, it wasn't actually effective because it like, they missed the mark, you know? I think because my sexual education was non-existent, I was like, okay, I gotta find it somewhere, you know? So it was a lot of like, not even knowing like the word porn, but like looking at porn type thing when you're like a child.
I have yet until this like literal school year, this semester, have not gone like an actual education about like my body and how it works for me and what can happen to me until my women and gender studies class. If I didn't have that and I didn't choose to take that class, there's that very, very high likelihood that I would not have gotten that at all. And like, it's crazy.
When I initially came out as gay, my mom was like, promise you won't have unprotected sex. And I was like, why? And like, cause I didn't really see it beyond, oh, I like boys. Like, I didn't really see it beyond that. Like, yes, there was a sexual aspect to it, but I that's not what I was focused on at the time. And it was kind of like I thought that having sex was like a death sentence, just because it was like, oh, I'll get AIDS if I have unprotected like anal sex. So hearing that stuck with me for a while.
I feel like I had a pretty healthy relationship with sexuality growing up. I think the one major thing that jumps out at me in this moment is how restrictive I thought of sexuality as, rather than how open and beautiful it is. It's the idea that sexuality is easily identified, defined, boxed in, and is fundamentally who you are, was something that I believed for a very long time, where I would like scramble for any sort of like label, when in reality identity and sexuality itself are such fluid concepts and are just silly like human constructs that we've decided to implement on and against people.
To be quite honest, like all of my sexual education came from porn. I mean, you learn about like the deflowering of a woman in school, but like a lot of it came from porn. It made me feel like from such a young age that I had to do the acting that those girls were doing, that if you didn't enjoy something, it doesn't, like, it's an act. So that did get me in a lot of trouble a couple times, where I had to pretend to like something, which is something you should never ever have to do.
I think as a trans person, I probably don't have any unique answer when I say that most of when I see myself in porn is probably very fetishized porn. Also, specifically for trans men, I've noticed that a lot of the porn I see is just, it feels very catered to men, which is really interesting. It feels kind of in the way that like lesbian porn often feels catered to men. It feels similar in that vein to me. Like when I do see porn representing trans men, I'm not seeing trans men with other queer people or other women. It's usually just a cis man like fucking this trans man, because I think there's a fetish there for men wanting to fuck men. You know what I mean? Because they are men, but maybe not to that man, the cis man. Sorry, that's confusing, but if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. But yeah, not a lot of good representation, or just in general. Like, I don't often say that I'm just casually scrolling anything and stumble across it. Like, I think to be looking, you have to be looking for it usually to see it, and if not, then it's usually the hyper fetishized stuff.
Like, it would be one thing if queer people filmed like home style videos, which is not like necessarily what I'm looking for all the time, or it's not what comes up. It's girl on girl. It's not like women loving women. It sucks because a lot of people don't understand how gay sex works, and you're never gonna find out through porn.
So, my experience with porn, very early age. I again was all like around a community of people who it was like talked about, but again like in the taboo way. And then if it was anything else, it was always in porn. So I'm not like an avid, like I don't watch porn, but when I did as a time, especially at a younger age, you know, any kid going through puberty, like I never ever really saw myself pushed out, I guess, as like a category, or like really represented, or if I did, it was always like fetish porn.
I don't really like consume a lot of porn because, like, again, I've kind of been told that it's bad and I should stay away from it. But I feel like when I do see like porn or like in movies or anything, they're like skinny girls, big boobs, like, and I'm like, that is just not accurate. Like, something I've noticed is like people who do watch a lot of porn have like a horrible expectation of what sex is like. Guys would be like in and out, oh, did that feel good? Oh, the girl had a good time in the porn, so like that's just how you do it. Because like in porn, everyone's having a good time, like everyone's like coming, everyone's doing this, but it's like in real life, like you have to try.
When I'm watching porn, and when I have watched porn in the past, I find myself viewing it through the lens of like a straight dude, which is weird for me because I'm not a straight dude. All the porn with trans people feels like fetish porn, and it's like, I don't want my real human body to be objectified on screen.
I don't remember the first time I was exposed to porn as a greater idea. I think I was exposed to sexuality at a young age, and I think very naturally, because of me being aware of those concepts, it came into my life at a younger age. I definitely am represented, and I can't deny that. I think there's the other element of being someone who is transmasc and identifying that way while presenting another way, like willingly, just because I feel comfy like that right now, is so difficult. I'm not gonna see myself in pornography that has transmasc people. I'm also not gonna see the entirety of myself in pornography that doesn't.
As I've come later in my life, there has been a lot of education that like places like OnlyFans and that has been able to offer, mostly because when you're able to message these content creators, people will ask questions and they're like, yeah, message me. And some of the people that I view or watch like would post videos explaining things, which was also really helpful. These people are also very understanding and respectful of like how like other people's experiences, what they're into sexually, which is really refreshing. Like there's no kink shaming, and there's no and it's not like, oh, your body is exactly like mine, so this is how it'll work. There's like an attentiveness to that people's bodies are just different, so their experiences will be different. And it's kind of come full circle. So these people who had to figure out how, like, any questions that they had to like figure it out themselves. They're now helping their community, promoting safe sex, promoting like consent. Those are all things that like I have seen in porn now, whereas like when I was younger before, it didn't feel like that type of agency or that type of perspective was involved in porn. It was like a lot more, it's supposed to be rough. You're not supposed to communicate with your partner. And I guess finding that clarity later in life has changed my experiences sexually for the better.
I had to unlearn my upbringing, I guess, in a sense, like that I was expected to enjoy the relationships I had with men, and I just didn't. It felt so forced and fake and strange. But I hadn't been with anyone else, or like a woman or any other identity yet, so but I remember being kind of like, well, I don't know if I would like that. I don't know anything about that. I don't know. I think I was definitely turned off to it at first, even though I knew that my relationships with men also didn't feel right. So that was something I had to unlearn, but I don't think it took long. I think once I realized that felt right, that it was really exciting, and things just took off from there. I was happy to be in relationships from that point on.
School is when you learned about that a man's penis goes in a woman's vagina and that's how you make a baby. Not that any other kind of sex, or why, which is crazy because like you didn't even talk about having sex for pleasure, sex because you love someone, queer sex, oh my god, there's so many different kinds, and we learned about one and it's just to make a baby. So I was like, okay, so my mom's had sex twice. Wow, she must know about it because she has 2 kids. So I thought that, you know, you had sex twice.
Like, I hadn't had sex before I came to college, so like it was super like, my ideas were not fleshed out ideas. And then being able to talk to people that had like actually had sex and be like, okay, so what? And learning that it's like not such a like gross, serious thing. Like it's just like, it can be fun and it can be chill.
But as far as reproductive health goes, I realized that I am incredibly lucky to have a mom and a grandma who had though they had such problems in the reproductive health like field, they've taught me a lot about how to take care of yourself. And I've seen a lot of, especially girls, they did not know how to take care of themselves. And it was really, really upsetting to have to, you know, explain certain things about reproductive health to friends or new friends that I don't know how they grew up. So it's really interesting to see people from all different walks of life who have such little understanding.
Growing up, I was in Boy Scouts, which is like an extremely toxic environment for young men and boys to be in. And it's a type of environment that promotes a lot of toxic masculinity and like these ideals of like what a man is. And even now, like it's still something that I'm unpacking, that a lot of the trauma and things that I faced there. For example, like being called slurs and like leadership not doing anything about it. And they're like, whatever, not dismissing it, but like they'll talk to them about it, but the importance of, hey, what you're saying is wrong, and like why it's wrong wasn't there. It was just like, oh, don't do that. There was no education behind it. Even when that stuff would happen, like they would be praised by their peers for doing these things. And I'm not saying that everyone's experience is like this, but a lot of the things that were presented to me there, I had to unlearn.
Figure out who I wanted to be and coming out, and what kind of man I wanted to be, and obviously not wanting to identify with toxic masculinity culture, and wanting to be an ally for women and be a supportive person and just be a respectful person in general, because everyone should be doing that. You shouldn't have to be an ally, it should just be respect. It was hard for me personally to navigate, at least to get out of that mentality and then not delve into that culture of wanting to fit in so hard with this group that would ostracize me anyways, majority of the time, respectfully, with my experience at least. It's just hard, because you know, you want that group to I want people to see me as that. I want to fit in, I want to be you. Like I see that every day, I feel that every day, but again, it boils down to like what matters more. Do I want to fit in, or do I want to fight for this group?
Later in my life, when I came out as trans, there were still some things surrounding like my identity and how I considered myself valid as a trans woman that were really big that I had to unlearn. Like I didn't always feel that I was valid or that I wasn't trans enough because I didn't want to like physically transition. Over time, I've unlearned that and understood that like my experience is invalid, and it was never something where I thought other people's experiences were invalid.
I think I needed to learn that like professionals don't know everything. Like, I feel like I need to trust my body more than I need to trust a professional to tell me what's going on with my body. Because obviously they didn't help. Just going to like an OBGYN, someone who's supposed to tell me like what's going on, what's wrong with me, they couldn't diagnose me, they couldn't take into consideration like all my symptoms and tell me what's going on.
I think I'm very grateful to be surrounded by a lot of different types of people who have different types of sex, different bodies, different body shapes and sizes and types. And so I feel very welcome to talking about that with like even coworkers or roommates. But as far as like class or like places on campus go, I don't often find that unless I feel incredibly comfortable with a professor and or the classmates within the class. You have to find a place where you feel safe enough to talk about those things. So I'm lucky I'm afforded that at home.
I definitely have a lot of those, like a lot of spaces where I can openly and safely, freely talk about, you know, my personal beliefs and how I feel and how I think the world should be. And I think those places definitely stem from like, you know, personal stuff, like, you know, my friends, my family, you know, close relationships. Coming to college especially has given me a lot more of those spaces. It's given me a lot more freedom to interact with people who definitely think like me. And it's been a lot easier for me to find that compared to my experience in high school, which was the complete opposite, where I was the only out trans kid. I was the only openly like really big queer kid for a long time. I was constantly getting belittled every day. I was getting harassed every day. I would get physically like assaulted like on multiple occasions. It was really hard to find a group that I would align with. It's definitely gotten a lot bigger and a lot easier for like things like this or things like my women and gender studies class again, where it's of course easier to find fantastic people who you can have really great conversations with.
You just don't think that you're gonna be able to like just talk about stuff like this, like when you're like a kid learning about stuff, you're like, people don't talk about it. But now I'm like in a place where I can just like literally talk just like with my roommates and my boyfriend, and like literally like all of us just together will be like talking about shit, and like it's fine and it's cool.
I think the people around me, like in my life, like my friends and my family, my partner, are the people that I can talk to. I think some of my like healthcare providers I could include in that. Like I definitely feel very comfortable with the doctors that I have, like Planned Parenthood. But when it comes to like my like general PCP, like I don't really feel anywhere near as comfortable talking about any trans-related health, reproductive issues. But that's, I guess, just my own personal experience, and I probably should change PCPs because of that.
Just like with my friends, with my boyfriend, that's kind of it. I don't think I've ever had like a professional outlet or like I've ever felt comfortable going to like a therapist or a doctor or like my parents even. Maybe sometimes, like it depends on the circumstance, but like really like my friends.
Damn, it would suck to have not queer, not trans, not neurodivergent friends. Everyone goes through life a little differently, and I'm just trying to find people whose life experiences mirror mine. And like, I feel like without the pretext of neurodivergence, trans, queer, like they'd get it a little, but they'd get it in like an abstract way.
It feels rather easy, like I would say for myself, to discuss this with friends. Part of me also doesn't, because I feel like it's a little bit taboo. I feel like there's a general lack of knowledge surrounding like queer or like gender nonconformity when it comes to reproductive health and like sexual education. I feel like that's a big gray space for a lot of people, and then it's left up to these queer gender nonconforming people to fill in their gaps of knowledge, which is unfair.
I don't think that my identity has been a barrier to getting any sort of resources at Keene State. But at the same time, I didn't necessarily like seek out resources. I didn't really feel that I needed anything. The only thing that I can think of was when I first came to Keene State, and I was pretty freshly trans. Like I was on testosterone and stuff, but I I don't know, I passed, but I definitely was clearly like trans, and that's not always the easiest thing. So anyways, I had requested a single dorm for that reason, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get one because they're super limited, and usually like not everyone's reason is accepted for it. But I did get one, and my reason was valid. Being trans was enough for that, I guess. So I felt seen and appreciated in that way.
As a cisgender woman, I think they'd be more open to communicating with me about any issues I had than if I were a different identity, because I don't know if like how they're trained to talk to people or like working with different identities, different bodies and everything. I think they're used to like male female. I also like underestimate my issues, so I don't feel the need to like reach out about things if it's not like a huge issue I'm bleeding out, you know, like if it's just like an inconvenience, oh no, I don't have my period, who cares, I'll just cope. It's the woman in me.
I don't think it's necessarily that my identity bars like anything for me. It's just there isn't that much. What there is like very limited, and it's like very clear that with like cutting women and gender studies programs and stuff like that, that it's just not a priority.
I don't think that they provide blood testing or rectal or oral swabs for early detection of things like HIV, which are really important, and like the earlier you can detect it, the better. And not that HIV is something exclusive to gay people, but it's like the testing methods for it aren't there.
Realistically, like cis people, they don't have to worry about that. You don't have to think about that. It's as easy as like asking literally your friend and being like, do you have this issue? Or like, hey, like, can I talk to you about like, you know, like what I'm feeling with this person? Like it's I'm wording it bad, but like you get to do that every day, and I will always have that other layer of, well, I'm trans on top of it. Like, and it's hard to not make it my whole identity when it literally is my identity, and it plays into just about everything I do. And the amount of statistics that are out there and percentages of my likelihood of getting even sexually assaulted, and same thing goes for women in a medical field where I'm reaching out for a problem, is horrifying. I feel like, again, for women and trans people, queer people, there should be so much more reaching out and pushing for, hey, come talk, or here's like education on it, and putting stuff out there and trying to create safer spaces for people to come talk about things, and actually educating yourself on these groups of people and what they go through and how it might be different for them could like just create such a better and welcoming space.
The more places that you're talking about like healthy things, like practices and like prevention and stuff like that, the more that you're talking about things like that, the better. And if it's not going to be given anywhere else, then it needs to be happening in like classes where we can talk about it like professionally, and people can learn about like other stuff as well. And I don't think it's a priority because we only run like a few women and gender studies classes a semester, and those other classes outside of that discipline aren't talking about that.
I definitely think it's really important to have education, like sexual education, sexual conversations, especially even at a college level, because despite my experience getting what I did of a sexual education, there are so many kids who definitely didn't get a sexual education, or if they did, it wasn't like what should be, and I think realistically considered a proper education, where again, there's more than just a man and a woman, and there's different ways to have sex, and it doesn't have to be a certain way. I don't think Keene State thinks it's really important at all, because I haven't really gone out of my way to look for any of them, but I don't think you should have to go look for them the same way that I don't have to go look for like a sports team, or I don't have to go look for like a certain other major, or like a business major. So if you can't sit there and tell me that you care without actively representing it, like it's action over intent, and it's action over words. So that's what it really comes down to.
I mean, it would be great if these were required to graduate, like having a women and gender studies that encapsulates like sexual education and like kind of like understanding reproductive healthcare. But I feel that these types of programs are really important, and I think that they should be mandatory, because especially in a college setting, and shouldn't be put on students to educate one another. Community is very important, but it's still very important that the college takes responsibility for their students. They definitely want us to think that they care, but through the resources and like things that are available, it doesn't really feel that they actually care. It feels that like, yes, they recognize it, yes, they acknowledge it, but I don't feel that they're doing enough. There's so much money spent on our athletic fields, and it's like, God forbid we have sexual health be attended to. The monetary value placed on either one seems disproportionate to how it actually impacts people's lives personally. Like, we can end the generational trauma, and we're choosing not to.
I think if the conversations are happening in like higher academia, then it like will trickle down into in high school classrooms and middle school classrooms. Like, if we make people okay, if we make teachers okay, if we make parents okay with having these conversations, then by nature it will trickle down to younger people. Those higher levels of academic conversation do stick with you. So I wish they paid more attention to that.
I feel like a lot of people also just write these conversations off as like middle school, high school topics, when absolutely they should be discussed in higher education. You close off yourself from knowing when and how to report assault, whether you're an older person or you're a literal child, if you don't provide these comfy areas to have these conversations in. We're just doing ourselves a disservice and not discussing this part of humanity.
I was taking a organizational diversity class, which primarily had safety majors, so people who were going into HR and a lot of like those categories. And one of the things that I found the teacher that I had, loved her. The students, the lack of knowledge that they had surrounding like diversity, equity, inclusion, which was what the course was on, was terrifying. It's very frustrating knowing that these people's jobs and interactions, they affect other people's lives, and knowing that there might not be that much care placed on it is very disheartening. As someone who's kind of had negative experiences with people who work in HR, these college students not knowing how to address, I don't know, this class being the first inkling of them learning about people who are not like cis and heterosexual and white, and like learning about diverse backgrounds is frightening, just because it's like the likelihood that they're going to continue researching it didn't seem promising.
More scholarship would be good. More education, just in general, would be good. And I feel like Keene probably does a lot better than other schools on that, because like I go to like FemCo. We do have a women and gender studies program, so like we have the opportunity to like, I don't know, learn about reproductive justice, whereas like I feel like that's not something you think about like K through 12. Like, you don't think about that before you go to like higher ed. So I think they address it. I don't know how well they do it.
They do the consent presentations for incoming first years, but they outsource a company that no one enjoys the presentation from, with feedback year after year. I mean, they've only been doing this particular one for a couple years, but like the feedback is always just like, this is uncomfortable, it's not beneficial, people aren't paying attention, people are leaving because they're uncomfortable. I just think that if Keene had actual resources in place, then we wouldn't have to be outsourcing to these companies that aren't that, like, they just don't get the Keene community, like the Keene State community specifically. I feel like the only good resource for like getting things is like FemCo, or like the one like bookshelf in the wellness center that has condoms.
Based on the fact that they cut the major in 2020, I'd say that they do not think it's very important. It almost seems like not a double standard, but that's the word I'm gonna use, to have like Holocaust and genocide studies in one corner and then completely cutting the women gender studies major, because like there are women who go through genocide and like we can't ignore those intersections. If Keene like continues the road they've been going down on, because like I don't know, 15 classes, maybe only 6 are running within the past 2 years, like it seems like Keene State is trying to like wean women gender studies down until it's nothing. And I just think like if we only examine one oppressed identity, what's the fucking point?